Hi, everybody. This is going to constitute the introduction for today's class. And really, it's just a quick overview of ethics. When I speak of ethics, it's basically, in a nutshell, what teachers can do and what teachers can't do. I guess is the easiest way to talk about it. So without further ado, let's get started. Really, it's so that you understand real quickly some of the things that you are allowed to do and some of the things that can get you into a lot of trouble in a hurry. Uh, what I want to specifically go over are things and what to look for on the Alaska DEED website, and then talk a little bit at the end about a mandatory reporting and about your duties about around social media. Okay. The National Education Association, the largest union, which whose job really is to protect teachers, has, of course, its own code of ethics, which is slightly different than the state of Alaska's. But understand that as professionals, you need to behave in an ethical way. And the guideline here is you're trying to improve student growth. I mean, that's really what you're doing. You're in it to help students learn. Teachers are allowed due process. You can't discriminate against a teacher based on skin color, religious, cultural, or sexual preferences or sex. You are going to have a contract, and within rights, you're allowed a certain amount of academic freedom. Generally, it's the freedom to teach the students in the way that you think fits best for your students and for your own background. I'm going through this slideshow fairly quickly. If you want to go back and linger on it, or if you want to follow the links, or explore on your own, that's certainly something I would encourage you to do. This real quick introduction is just meant to give you a foundation so you know where to go. All of you either are teachers or are going to be teachers very soon, and so you're going to be fairly familiar with the state of Alaska's certification website page, as well as all of the requirements that are here. Some of the things that you ought to be aware of is there is, of course, a fee for your certification. You also have to fulfill the requirements for certain Alaska Studies courses and multicultural courses if you're from out of state. If you took a in-state program, that's you've already covered that, so it's not a deal. You also have some mandatory trainings that you have to do, which are mostly e-learning, and then you have to get a fingerprint and a background check before you're allowed to be hired. How did I find all this information? I simply Googled Alaska AKDEED website, and boom, or at Alaska DEED, whatever I wanted, certification, standards, ethics, all of that can be found fairly quickly through a Google search. Speaking of the Code of Ethics, I cut and pasted the Code of Ethics. It's broken into parts, and here's A, B, C, D parts. And essentially it lays out in fairly strict detail what teachers are basically not allowed to do, okay? Again, you're going to find this by Googling Code of Ethics. And when you do this exercise that I have for you, you can pull up this slide and you can click on the link. It's a hot link, or you can, of course, Google it yourself. But these are the Code of Ethics that I want you to follow when you're doing this exercise that's in one of the later tasks, the case studies. When you're writing lesson plans, you're going to become familiar with the standards to which your students are held, or to which you need to hold your students. If you're a science teacher, you're going to become familiar with the science standards. Whatever grade you teach or whatever subject you teach, it is your responsibility to educate yourself about these standards. When I ask for them on a lesson plan or a lesson plan template, you need to include the standard name and number, and then a brief description of that standard. Teachers generally are allowed to work long enough to get tenure. In the state of Alaska, tenure isn't a great big deal. Basically, what it means is that you are allowed a little bit longer in your plan of improvements and certain checklists that you have to go through. You just have a longer period of time to do that. Um, Typically, a tenure is seen by some people in the community as not a good thing. They see it as a way to retain incompetent or poor teachers. And while that can be true, I would say that the decision to keep a teacher on is really due to the principal. If the principal hasn't been doing due diligence, if the principal doesn't observe that teacher often enough, if the principal isn't strict enough or hold that teacher to a high enough standard, then yes, you're going to get bad teachers in your building. So that's why I really think it's incumbent upon the principal, the person in charge of that building, to make sure that he or she has quality teachers in the building. Um, but if you work for over 4 years, at least in the Fairbanks North Star Borough School District, you will be granted tenure. And if you have tenure, that means that you shouldn't be the first one let go in a budget down cut. When the budget gets cut, similar things like that. Typically, they decide those things in Fairbanks based on how long you've worked. And the longer you've worked in the district, the more job security you have. But in terms of secondary students, that job security is based not just on how long you've held the job, but on whether or not you have the right certification. For instance, if you're a math teacher and your building has to cut 3 teachers, but there's way too many math teachers in your building, then you may get cut, even though there's a science teacher in your building who's only been there 1 year, because you don't have the qualifications to teach math. So it really isn't just on how long you've been there, it's on a number of different factors. Teachers, of course, can be dismissed for anything that's here on the slide. And again, if you haven't had a chance to read it, I would encourage you to come back and read it at your own time, at your own speed when you have a little more time. Teachers are allowed to join unions. There's usually local unions, and within those local unions are under the umbrella of the national union. For instance, here in Fairbanks, we have the Fairbanks Education Association, and underneath the National Education Association, the NEA. One thing that unions do is they have your back. If you have a principal that's discriminating against you because of your sexual orientation, the union will go to bat for you. They'll make sure that you're not fired because of that reason. If they're going to fire you, they have to have a legitimate reason that, again, it's either an ethical reason or one of the ones that were on the previous slide, insubordination or incompetence or something like that. Another thing that unions do is they negotiate contracts for you. So what that means is that the union will go to the school board with a specific contract negotiation, and you can let the union then decide how much you're going to get paid that year, how many days of sick leave you're going to have, which medical benefits you're going to have. All of that can be negotiated by the union. That means that every person doesn't have to negotiate individually with a union. It also equalizes everything or makes everything equitable. So women are paid the same as men with equal time in job. People with master's degrees are paid the same as other people with master's degrees, even though they've been in the building longer or not as long or whatever, but the union can negotiate those. What right to work laws are is that as a employee in the district, if your state has right to work laws, then you can opt not to pay union dues. And if you opt not to pay union dues, then you don't pay those dues. The union still negotiates for you, and you seem to get the benefits of being in the union. But in essence, what that does is it automatically takes away some of the things that unions need to function, and that is membership by their employees. I already talked a little bit about academic freedom. So when we speak of academic freedom, you must balance your views based on the interests of your students and society. So you can't be biased in your political views, and you can't spout those to students as fact. You need to balance your views with those of society. You're also allowed to teach the curriculum in certain ways, and you're generally, but you may be constrained in what curriculum you teach based on what district you work for and where you work in the country. As a school district employee or as a state of Alaska teaching certificate holder, you are a mandatory reporter. That means you're going to be trained in some of these indicators of child abuse, and including emotional, physical, sexual, and neglectful. And your job is to report this child abuse. When you report the child abuse, you can't just tell your principal and be done with it. It's your duty to make sure that the principal follows up on it, that the principal calls social services, the social services does something, or the principal calls the police or the law enforcement in your community. You have to make sure that thing moved up forward through the chain to protect the child. That's really the job here. Your job is to protect the child. A little bit on copyright laws, and then we're going to go to the last bit. On copyright laws, generally teachers are allowed a lot of latitude. Photocopies, it's okay. Videotapes is okay, as long as you're doing it for face-to-face instruction of students. Okay? Now, where can you get in trouble? Let's say that you wanted to teach a particular novel, okay, like Two Old Women. Well, you can't just Xerox every single page of Two Old Women and staple them together 30 times and hand them out to your students. That would be a violation of copyright law. But what you're allowed to do, if you wanted to print out a particular image in Two Old Women, or a particular metaphor in Two Old Women, or even a chapter, you would be allowed to do that for limited amount, because you may not want to purchase a copy for every book for just going over a couple pages. So you're allowed to do that within reason. Videotapes, again, as long as you're not showing them for money. But if you are showing, never mind. Computer software, be careful here. Some of the computer software that's online is free, but others you do have to pay a site license. If you're not sure, ask your principal or the librarian or the person in charge of network services there in your district. With your email and your internet, again, you have to behave professionally. Your email, your school email, can only be used for professional purposes. That is communicating with parents, communicating with the school district, and so on and so forth. The internet use that you do, again, should be used only for purposes of instruction of students. It's not allowed to be used for other purposes, personal or political. You're not allowed to do that with your professional email. And publishing on the internet, just make sure that you protect the privacy of your kids. If you want to publish a book, that's way cool, but make sure that you're protecting the privacy of your kids. Last thing is social media. And I hope I have enough time to do this. I meant to hit a stopwatch, but I don't know how much time I have left. But this one is a big one. And the reason it's an issue is because those of you who are younger than me have grown up with social media. You're very used to social media. You're very comfortable with it. You post all kinds of things on social media that make me cringe, honestly. But here's the deal. As a teacher, you're a teacher 24/7. The community sees you first and foremost as a teacher. Think about it. Have you ever seen your teacher in the shopping mart, in the shopping center? Yeah, you do. And as soon as you see your teacher in the supermarket, you're like, "Oh, there's Mrs. Jones. Hi, Mrs. Jones. How are you?" Do you call her Jill or whatever? Is she your great friend? No, she's your teacher, for heaven's sake. And you are always going to be a teacher as well. So because of that, because the community sees you a teacher, you're held to a really high standard in terms of what appears on social media with your picture on it. Here are some examples that actually happened. These teachers lost their jobs, okay? Here we have a teacher at a bachelorette party. She poses on the lap of a stripper, okay? And a friend posts it on the friend's Facebook or social media post. But what happened then is the community saw the teacher in this situation that did not look good. And so this was a teacher behaving unprofessionally. And even though it was on her own time, and even though it wasn't posted by her, she was sanctioned, and I believe she was fired. Okay? Another one, of course, it's inappropriate to ever post about your kids, especially in this example, if you hate your students. inappropriate, you're going to lose your job.